girls. Welcome back to my channel. Today I thought that I would be present for our presentation just because you guys did such a great job with your TikToks and your political cartoons. For the TikToks, I was absolutely cracking up. I think it's hilarious that you guys had to post those to your actual accounts. I don't know why I thought you guys would make an account and not have followers so that people couldn't see them, but you bravely put them on your own accounts, which I thought was really cool, and I laughed a lot. Your political cartoons were super cute and super on point, so that was really cool. And hopefully we can do stuff like that in the future as well. However, hopefully we can get back to Room 21 sometime soon as well. I appreciate all of your guys' cooperation during this time. You guys have been doing a really good job, really stepping up, and that's all I can really ask for. If you guys have any feedback, if you guys know of any apps or, things that other teachers have been doing that you think could be even more helpful, definitely shoot me an email. I'm open. I just want you guys to be getting out of this what you need to. So that's all I really have. Just keep working hard and, stay healthy. Hopefully this will all be behind us sometime relatively soon. Let's take a look at what the heck we have to do today. All right. Okay, yeah. So we are going to be so here is on here is everything you have to do today. So ultimately today's task, right? You're going to read through, you're going to read pages 442 and 446. Those are going to be our sections 2 and 3 of chapter 14. It's pretty simple. We're looking at section 2, which is railroads. We looked a little bit at that the last time we were together, but I kind of cut us off. I didn't really want to go that far. But we're going to continue with the age of the railroad, and we're going to be looking at big business and labor. We should be able to get through that pretty quickly. And then I have attached in our Edmodo post a PDF file. Pretty much, it's like a scan. It's going to be on the New Immigrants worksheets. New Immigrants is section 1 of chapter 15. I plan on assessing on 14 and 15 together. So we'll take a look at that today, the New Immigrants, but we won't get too far into it. So let's take a look. You will be expected to complete definitions for the key terms and names for section 2 and for section 3. And then you're only responsible for the new immigration worksheet. So section 1, which is the expansion industry, you guys took a look at that, did a great job with your TikToks and political cartoons. This pretty much just reiterates your main idea. The key terms you're looking at, why it is significant. Section 2 is age of the railroads. The age of the railroads, right? The main idea is growth and consolidation of the railroads. Consolidation is when two companies come together. And it's kind of talking about how railroads expanding really benefited the nation. However, at the same time, it led to corruption, monopolies, and monopoly is the total control over a business. And it just became super problematic. But, railroads made it possible to expand west and, really create booming business that way. So let's take a look at that because the next section is big business and labor. So let's take a look at our PowerPoint. All right, so just as a recap, let's see, slideshow, current slide. This is the melting pot we were talking about, right? Think of it as a pot of all of these people, different cultures, they come from different countries. And the melting pot, right? You're mixing these all together to create what is now the United States. However, in this bowl, cultural groups should exist separately and maintain their practices and institutions, right? People came to the United States for opportunity, for freedom. So therefore, when they get here, they should not be confronted or they should not suffer the blow of conformity, right? Of westernization. They should be able to maintain their culture and traditions just by bringing it over to the U.S. So in this slide, it says like, where's the dressing that covers it all? Why does it all taste like tomato, right? Why is there such a Western feel to this melting pot? And how come there's really nothing binding us together? We had learned that Chinese immigrants had faced a lot of discrimination. Obviously, African Americans suffered majorly during this time, even post Reconstruction. So we know that not everyone is seen as equal in the U.S. at this point. All right. We already went through this, right? Natural resources were huge. Oil. Natural resources, Edwin Drake, the Bessemer process, right? Good job on your TikTok, Bella. New uses for steel, right? Thomas Edison, you guys did a great job with that as well. I was cracking up. Light bulb. Christopher Sholes with the typewriter, Alexander Graham Bell, and Thomas Watson with the telephone. Right. Age of the railroads, right? Again, railroads. So, railroads make local transit reliable, and it makes westward expansion possible. We can move further west because we have railroads. People are more able to move west with the railroad. The government makes land grants, and they pay loans to the railroads to help settle the West, right? We're going to send these people, send them with funds, make the West happen, right? Now we have railroads, okay? We're going to give the railroads all this money. They're going to settle the West and help develop this country and connect the East and the West. So finally, we see our first transcontinental railroad. So we separate it. At this point, you're traveling and the time zones aren't the same. So the U.S. Railroad adopts time zones. They come up, and Dowd comes up with this idea of dividing the Earth's surface into 24 time zones, right? The International Conference sets these time zones, and Congress adopts this, and then it was set in stone. Because what was happening before is it was divided even further, and people were constantly changing their watches trying to figure it out, and it was just kind of a mess. So this alleviated that problem. So we have opportunities and opportunists. George N. Pullman builds a rail car factory on an Illinois prairie, and he provides for his workers. And by providing for his workers, we mean that he gives them housing, doctors, shops, sports fields, right? He gives them all these amenities that it takes to survive. And his company tightly controls the residents to ensure a stable workforce. So there's a lot of, what's the word? Not supervisory. There's little freedom, right? He has a pretty large control over the residents in the place to make sure that they're coming to work and doing their job effectively. So now we're looking at credit mobile. We're looking at credit mobilier, I think. I want to say mobilier, but it's not French. It's mobilier. Okay. So railroads are making more and more money, and they end up kind of jumping into this like corrupt business. Union Pacific stockholders form a construction company called Credit Mobilier, and they overpay for laying down the tracks, and then they pocket the profits, right? So it's like, okay, the vending machine is selling Snapple for $2, and I get one out of the machine, and I say, okay, guys, who's thirsty? And you all raise your hand like, we're thirsty. And I'm like, okay, $5, right? Okay, so like you're ripping someone off essentially. The Republicans are kind of wrapped up in this scandal, and when it comes to the light, when it comes to the surface, and it's revealed that this was a huge scam, the party's tarnished. The reputation of the party is tarnished. Railroad. So farmers are mad over this railroad corruption. The railroad sells government lands to businesses and not settlers. That's a problem. They were supposed to sell it to settlers so that they would settle west. They fix the prices, meaning they talk to everybody around. They say, hey, rather than us competing with, like, high wages for workers versus low wages for workers, or selling our products for a higher amount, right? Or trying to compete with one another by selling them for a lower amount. Why don't we fix it? Why don't we fix the price so that no matter what, we're making a profit, right? Rather than you and I competing over who's selling cupcakes at break. Come to my table. I'm selling cupcakes for $1, right? But then the person next to me is selling cupcakes for 50 cents. I can't beat that. People are going to go to that table to buy the cupcakes for 50 cents. What do? I go to that table. I say, hey, we're both selling cupcakes here. Why don't we each sell cupcakes for $2 a pop, and we'll make a bigger profit, both of us, right? Because people are going to buy them no matter what. Let's make it a higher price. That's what they're doing. That was the idea of a fixed price. This fixed price for goods and different technologies and things like that really kept the farmers in debt. We already saw when the farmers formed the Grange how they were upset. Crap. Okay. Interstate Commerce Act. I'm sure you heard about this last year with Mrs. Castellano. Basically, in 1886, the Supreme Court states that the states are not permitted to set rates on interstate commerce. You can't, the interstate commerce is business that takes place across state lines, and that is, the federal government can make laws regarding interstate commerce. States can't. The outrage leads to the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. Government can supervise railroads. Why? Because they go across state lines. Therefore, it's considered interstate commerce, which is interstate business, and the government can control aspects of that and pass laws in regards to it. I got my stuff down here. Sorry. So basically, everybody's freaking out. No one's really respecting the Interstate Commerce Act, and so the commission's passed, the ICC. And it's difficult for the ICC to take action, partly due to the loopholes. It's like, how can I tell that they're bargaining? How is it not just a coincidence that their rates are at the same? You know what I mean? It was hard for them to really enforce the laws that they were supposed to, or to really regulate in that sense. Abuses, mismanagement almost kills the railroad companies. They contribute to the Panic of 1893, which leads to an economic depression, which is when production slows over a course of 6 months or more. And 25% of the railroads are overtaken by financial companies. Big business and labor. So this is section 3. Like I said, we're moving pretty quickly. Big business, right? We think of like, when you think of big business, you think of like Rockefeller. So we're going to be looking at how big business kind of leads to everybody being like, whoa, we need unions to make sure that we fight for our labor rights. I don't care if you say Carnegie. I don't care if you say Carnegie, or if you even say Carnegie, because apparently I had to look it up. The Scottish way of saying it is Carnegie, whereas people in the US say Carnegie. I'm going to probably say both, so feel free. This man came from Scotland to the US when he was 12, and he is the rags to riches story. He is the American dream embodiment, right? He gained control or monopoly over the steel industry, and he wrote the Gospel of Wealth, and he donated about 90% of his income to charity, which is wild. We're going to take a look at where he came from, what he did. Oh, apparently not. Okay, I'll tell you. So Andrew Carnegie, he, like I said, grew up in the US from the age of 12 on. He was as young as 12 working in a factory, working, it's considered child labor. And he ultimately was given the opportunity to buy stock in a company, and he did. And, he had a steel company. And then what he did was he kind of introduced this horizontal vertical technique, where what he would do was he would, it's called a horizontal and vertical integration. We talk about it later, or at least we're supposed to. I don't know where it went. All right, I'll just explain it. Okay. I don't know where that slide went. All right, that's fine. I'll just do this. All right, so Carnegie comes up with this idea of horizontal or vertical integration. So this is what it looks like. Let's just do this. File now. You can also look in your textbook on page 448 if you want. If you want to pause this and take a look there, there's a chart. So basically, here's a little chart. This would be vertical, obviously, because it's going up and down. This is vertical integration. And then across this way would be horizontal integration. What vertical integration does is it controls aspects of all production. And that's how you gain control over the industry, or that's how you gain control over the market, right? So maybe you are working in a, what do they have here for the example? All right, railroad, right? Here are the tracks. Here's the train, choo-choo, coming through, right? So you control the trains. Before you even control the trains and the railroad, right? You own the factory that makes the steel and makes the parts, right? You own the factory that makes the steel, produces the product, right? And then up here, right, steel has to come from somewhere. So your raw materials, right, like your forests and stuff, your raw materials, if you control that, you are considered to have vertically integrated your trade, your industry, not your trade, I'm sorry, your industry. Horizontal is just owning all the factories, right? So if you have a monopoly over the railroads, it's because you own all the steel companies, right? You said, hey, I'm going to buy out the company. I'm going to pay you this much and I'm going to control it, right? Or you can say to them, hey, why don't we all agree to sell for this much, or make our, just like, it's called a trust, right? Because you trust the other person to uphold the other end of the bargain, right? So everyone's kind of making the same amount of money, right? So this is when you buy out your suppliers. And then horizontal integration is gaining control over the other company. So the idea is that for horizontal integration, the idea is that there's no competition. You're going to be taking notes on this anyways because you're going to do all the key terms and stuff like that, but I just thought I would show you. Let's get back to this guy. All right. Now we have JP Morgan. So this is still a bank today. So one of the big four banks. Yeah. So JP Morgan was an expert in banking and financing. He financed the reorganization of railroads, insurance companies, and banks, and he bought out Carnegie in 1901 and started the U.S. Steel Corporation. Here's Cornelius Vanderbilt, another famous guy with the railroads. And we have John D. Rockefeller, who changed the game. Alex, I know you like John D. Rockefeller, so listen up. This image is showing John D. Rockefeller holding the White House. And it's like, oh, look at this silly little thing. I think that's the title of the artwork. Basically, he was so wealthy and had such control over the oil industry that he had more power than any elected official in the U.S., right? His company was called Standard Oil. And if you look in your textbook, he gained, we should write this, he gained total control. He gained total control over the oil industry. And he did this, right? How he did the horizontal. He just bought everybody out. Horizontal integration. Am I missing anything? Right, he merged with J.P. Morgan. Um, he basically would, sell oil at the lowest possible cost. He sold oil at the lowest possible cost. So the surrounding businesses, why would you buy the same product at a higher price? You wouldn't. That's how he got control over it. He was able to produce more at a lower price, and that is how you gain control or monopoly over an industry. He gave away over $500 million in charity, which is why government officials hated these millionaires, because they had such an influence on the community around them and they controlled the market like a puppet. And so elected officials hated these guys, but people in society, actual members of society who weren't, the bigwigs, who weren't part of politics, they loved these guys because they gave back to charity and they really did a lot for the community around them. So not everybody felt that way, but a lot of people who were the beneficiaries of those programs and things enacted by those guys really did like them. You guys have heard of Duke University. It had to come from somewhere, right? So this guy, James Buchanan Duke, he was a major producer of tobacco goods. His family, they were a bunch of smart entrepreneurs, guys who make their own business. And he became famous for his business in textiles and hydroelectric power. Okay, let's look at this. All right, so just take a second to look it over. Look around. Okay. Take note of the upper left. Then look at this one. In the upper left, who's this guy? Probably a feudal lord or a king, right? Someone of power. And these are all the peasants kind of giving them all of their riches. Well, if you look over here, right? If you look over here, it's actually quite sad. We see wages, right? Wages, citizens tax, interest on mortgaged farm, right? People, your everyday people, your middle class, your lower class, are just handing over bags of money to these big businesses, right? War, tariff, and monopoly. Tariff is obviously a tax. Monopoly is control over a business. So that's what we're seeing. Okay, everybody kind of is handing over everything they got. It was hard to make a living. Carnegie made $23 million in a year at this time, right? At this time, which is absolutely insane. Carnegie made $23 million in a year, whereas a man made about $600 a year and a woman made about like $200 a year. I'm not making $23 million a year, right? Some people are. I'm not. But the difference between what I make annually and what these guys are making annually, like $600, that's a crazy difference. And that's just something to really keep in mind, right? Trusts are, businesses that come together to kind of oppress these guys and take all their money. We have Horatio Alger. He wrote Rags to Riches. It was basically like stories about how people came to be what they were, to rise from the very, very bottom of the barrel. An example would be Carnegie, right? You got to think about it. In your textbook, there's a main question that asks you, giving back, is that an excuse or does that justify the monopoly of a business? Something to think about. Carnegie searches for ways to make better products more cheaply. Who wouldn't want to do that? He hires talented staff, he offers companies stock, and he promotes competition. So Carnegie used vertical integration, whereas Rockefeller used horizontal. Carnegie does use horizontal integration because he buys out the suppliers around. Not only does he control business through the entire duration of the business, right? The raw materials, the production, and the actual function of the industry, but he controls horizontally too. So he's got the whole thing. Oh, we do look at this. You know what? I knew it was in here. No, I don't want to turn on the sticky keys. No. Okay. This is horizontal, right? We're seeing all these independent oil refineries they're owned by one or they're combined into one. And then we see over here, okay, every piece of the industry, all the products, all the raw materials. And then there's the Carnegie Steel Company. Social Darwinism. You guys remember Darwin from grade school? He had this theory of evolution where, survival of the fittest. Only the fittest in society survive. Everyone else is SOL. So in social Darwinism, right? It's like, oh, you can't compete with the big business, or you can't handle the environment of the factory. Oh well. Economists use social Darwinism to justify the doctrine of laissez-faire. We know that laissez-faire from last year in Gov, we know that this means hands off, right? Hands off of what? Not Lego my ego. It's more talking about hands off of business, right? Government, hands off of business. Don't regulate us. Keep your taxes away from us, right? Let us do our thing, right? Let's keep this capitalist country capitalist. Laissez-faire called for government to kind of back off of business and let them operate on their own. Businesses that don't survive, you know what? It's their own fault, and it's because they weren't run properly. That was the excuse. That's the idea of social Darwinism. When in reality, it's going to be hard for, a family business to survive against corporate companies, especially when, they don't have the resources or the technology that big companies have. Like I said, this idea of survival, right? Like the survival of the fittest. Wealthy people love this. They're like, oh, this is great for me. It eliminates my competition. This notion of individual responsibility, right? Like either sink or you swim, that fell in line with the Protestant ethic, which in this Protestant ethic basically said, oh, we're rich because we're in God's favor. We did him right. And poor people, they obviously did something wrong, so they're being punished. That was the idea. Growth and consolidation. Businesses try to control industry with mergers, and they buy out competitors, right? So I'm a big business. I sell burritos. You're a company that also sells burritos. What am I going to do? I'm going to buy you out. We're going to merge us together. So this way, I'm making all the money and I don't have any competition. Buy all other companies to form monopolies, control production, wages, prices, right? If you buy out all those companies, now you're in control. You don't have to compete with them. You can set the production that you want, the wages, the prices. Holding companies buy all the stock of other companies. John D. Rockefeller founds the Standard Oil Company. He forms a trust, and the trustees run separate companies as if they're one. So Rockefeller's still getting the payout. Rockefeller and the robber barons. So Rockefeller profits by paying low wages to his workers and underselling others. When he controls the market, he raises the prices. So because he controls the entire market, you can't find a job anywhere else that's going to pay you more because he's going to pay you because he has control over the entire market. There's nowhere else to buy the product because he has control over the entire market. So where are you going to go? You can't. There's no competition, right? You can't go to the discount store. You got to go to him. Critics call these industrialists robber barons, but they also become philanthropists, which is how they try to justify what they're doing. Merger is when one company buys out the stock of another company. And then monopoly is complete control over the industry's production, wages, and prices. You learned about this last year in Gov. Again, that's why we're kind of rolling through it. The government thinks that expanding corporations stifles free competition. And so they think that the government at this point is saying that as corporations get bigger and bigger and bigger, it's not fair to the local companies, the other companies around. The Sherman Antitrust Act declares that a trust is illegal if it interferes with free trade. It's hard to prosecute the companies and the government just stops enforcing it. And then we have labor unions. Labor unions emerge. We are still in section 3, so we're hang tight. Labor unions emerge. You guys know labor unions. They're all over Philadelphia. Philadelphia is run by labor unions. When I worked on a campaign, I worked on a couple of campaigns, but when I was in college and I worked on campaigns, I was going into my junior year. And I was a campaign manager. And part of my responsibility was reaching out to labor unions because they have such a large role in politics. And basically what I would have to do is I would have to go to the offices of these labor unions and talk to the liaisons and talk to the labor presidents and basically ask for the candidate's endorsement. When you ask for the candidate's endorsement, it means, Courtney Weiss or Mrs. D'Angelo of St. Basil Academy endorses this candidate for office. Vote for them. Trying to pretty much garner support from all the people that belong to that union to vote for this political party. For example, trying to think. Years ago, maybe like 15 years ago, the police have a union, and their union always backed Democratic candidates. However, in recent years, we see more and more often that police are backing and endorsing Republican candidates, right? It has to deal with legislation that's being passed and how, this candidate will protect you. So we're going to look at labor unions. Northern wages are generally higher than the South. You should still know that today that wages differ throughout the United States depending on each state's economic situation. You'll get paid less if you work in Kentucky than if you work in Philadelphia, but you won't get nearly paid as much as if you worked in DC. Exploitation, when you take advantage, right? Unsafe conditions unite workers across regions. Most workers have 12-hour days, 6-day work weeks, right? The tasks aren't great. The work's not great. There's no vacation, no sick leave. At one point in, I think it was 1889, your textbook says that over about like 675 workers were dying weekly. Yeah, it's a pretty big deal. To survive, everybody in the house needed to work, including children as young as 5. I don't even know what they could do at that point, but they did, and they were injured. Sweatshops were tenement workshops, and they only really allowed for women and children because they were tiny, right? Children were valued at this point because with the machinery, they had hands that were small enough to go in there and fix stuff. And that's why they liked them for that kind of stuff. And women were more nimble with more slender hands. So that was kind of a reason. We have the NLU, the National Labor Union. This is the first large-scale national organization. In 1868, the NLU gets Congress to give 8-hour days to civil servants. Civil servant is someone who works for the government. So this doesn't necessarily deal with the private sector. We see that the local chapters reject African Americans, and so African Americans form the Colored National Labor Union. And the Noble Order of the Knights of Labor is like a new organization that opens us up to Blacks, women, unskilled laborers, right, to kind of fight for them as well. So that kind of, the CNLU kind of merges with the Knights of Labor. And they support 8-hour day, equal pay, and arbitration. Basically, arbitration is like, hey, rather than strike, because striking was something that the labor unions did to get what they want, and we still see strikes today. The Knights of Labor kind of said, hey, let's use strikes as a last resort. They wanted to organize all workers under one banner. Arbitration is what I was talking about. Basically, it's like, let's go to trial to figure out what's going on. Union movements diverge. We have craft unionism. These are skilled workers from one or more trades. In Philadelphia, we have the building trades. We have DC 21. DC 21 is a painters and a glaziers union. We have the carpenters union. We have stagehands, which deals with setting up things for concerts and whatnot. That's a union. So we have a bunch of different unions for trades. Samuel Gompers was a Jewish man who helped found the American Federation of Labor, and this AFL used collective bargaining for better wages, hours, and conditions. Collective bargaining, right? It's pretty much like, hey, collective bargaining is the right for you to kind of decide what you're going to make, what money. Like, you can't just go to a job and they're like, yeah, we're going to let you make this much money. Collective bargaining kind of states, like, you can fight for your wage, hours, working conditions, things like that. You guys know what boycotts are. Eugene V. Debs, he forms the American Railway Union, strikes. Union movements diverge. We are still in section 3. Still in section 3. Some labor activists turned to socialism. If you guys know what socialism is, you should know what socialism is because you all took Gov last year and Econ. Socialism is the opposite of capitalism. Socialism is characteristic of like a command economy. I'm sure you all have heard some of Bernie Sanders commercials, things like that. Like, he calls himself a socialist. A socialist basically just says that the government should have more control over business and property, right? When you hear the word socialism, you should just think that the government controls business and property, and that they call for an equal distribution of wealth. The IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, forms, and they are organized by radical unionists. So these guys are like it's a band of unskilled workers, and they're fighting for their right, and they are calling for the government to control industries and business because of the robber barons, right? Because of the people that are taking such advantage and creating monopolies. Employers fight the unions. So they forbade union meetings, fired union members, and forced new employees to sign yellow dog contracts saying that they will not join a union. Employers fight the unions again. So continued, right? A lockout is when a business owner prevents employees from working, send them home. What happens is you can hire a scab. I'm sure you guys might have heard of a scab before. If you're ever downtown, you see those big inflatables of like rats and things like that. Basically, that's when a company, if a union doesn't do the labor, say that there's a big building being built downtown, and the company and the employer decides to go with a private company rather than a union, unions will protest that. They'll protest it downtown. They'll put up they'll send guys down there to protest, to basically, call out these scabs, the replacement workers. Blacklists are lists of workers employees aren't going to hire. We have the Great Strike of 1877. This is where the strikes turn violent. Baltimore and Ohio Railroad strike, and this strike spreads to other lines. Federal troops have to ultimately intervene. Then we have the Haymarket Affair. 3,000 people gather at Chicago's Haymarket Square, and they protest police brutality. Violence breaks out. 8 are charged with inciting a riot, and they are convicted. And the public kind of turns against this idea of a labor movement. Carnegie Steelworkers strike over their pay cuts, and they win the battle against Pinkerton's. Pinkerton is like a national security agency, and the National Guard reopens this plant ultimately. And steelworkers, they don't remobilize for quite some time. Pullman Company, right? Basically, they were a railroad company. We looked at him earlier, and he provided like luxury train cars where you could lay down and sleep and stuff. But he lays off 3,000, cuts wages, but not the rents for the people that are living there, and the workers kind of strike. People start freaking out, get violent. Federal troops are sent to resolve the situation, and Eugene Debs is jailed. And most of the workers are fired and many are blacklisted. Yay, finally a woman. Jesus. Women are barred from many unions, and they unite behind powerful leaders. So we have Mary Harris Jones. She was known as Mother Jones, and she was the most prominent organizer in women's labor. She worked for United Mine Workers, and she led the Children's March, right, for the fight for child rights, to not have children work. They called her Mother Jones because she looked out for the children like a mother would. Strikes turn violent. Management and government pressure the unions. Employers forbid unions, and they turn the Sherman Antitrust Act against labor. And there's a legal limitation that cripples the unions, but membership rises. And then we have the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. This fire claimed the lives of 146 young immigrant workers, and this was one of the worst disasters since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. They were operating and working in inhumane working conditions. They were prompted to create a new building with fire codes and safety codes. This was pretty much like the straw that broke the camel's back. Because of the safety codes, people could not escape. Because of the fire, it kind of just brought to the light what things needed to be done with major factories during this time to avoid this type of tragedy to ever take place again. I feel like I've been talking for a really long time. So what I'll do is I'll end there. We will start with the new immigrants on Monday, I guess. However, you still have to you still have to complete the new immigrants worksheet, so that we're pretty much just like, not that we're going to be discussing, but so that we're pretty much ready to go over the notes and get through them next time I see you guys. Like I said, you are responsible for just reading sections 2 and 3. So let's see. Section 2, Age of the Railroads, done. And then section 3, Big Business and Labor, also done. Just make sure that you get this done, and then guess we'll be good to go, right? I also attached down here another template, because girls, it's really important to make sure we're doing everything in MLA, right? So that it's uniform, looks good. Just what's expected of you. So thank you for your attention. I hope that you paid it. Keep up the good work. You guys are doing a really good job under these circumstances. I know that you have worked for other classes. If this seems to be a lot, someone shoot me an email and tell me what's up. So yeah, but let me know if you have any trouble. If you need any help, reach out, and keep up the good work. And hopefully, I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Bye.